Good morning, Evergreen Online, on this very warm summer Sunday. For this month's Church in the Park, we are celebrating our VBS finale. And if you've not dropped by our campus in the month of July, you miss seeing all the life that was overflowing and exploding out of our children's chapel for our Vacation Bible School themed Ready, Set, Create. The kids had a blast learning about God, eating snacks, and playing outrageous games, and I think a lot of the adult volunteers had a blast too. I am super grateful for our family ministries team of leaders and volunteers who helped to put on this program, and I'm especially grateful for the creativity of Natalie Sum, who played a key role in leading this year's program. Now, whether or not you were a part of VBS this year, Everyone is invited to Arcadia County Park this morning to celebrate. We ordered a few of the giant pizzas from Jay's Pizza in Monterey Park with some cold, sweet treats for dessert. You'll have to come to see what they are. Now, our Creation Connection field trip will also meet after church in the park this Sunday and leave for Big Dalton Canyon in Glendora at about 12:15. Now, before we start worship and get into today's online devotional service, I wanted to share a few important announcements with you that are time sensitive and critical for the next few weeks. First of all, I want to remind you that our entire schedule on Sundays shifts in the month of August. Our regular Sunday services move entirely online for the whole month, and we invite you to view those services on our YouTube channel starting at 10 a.m. every week. On Sundays. In its place, we are inviting all Evergreen leaders and volunteers onto campus at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings to our Summit Leadership Gatherings. These Sunday morning gatherings will be a time of worship, fellowship, and equipping as we give some spiritual and practical tools to make Evergreen into more of a home for everyone. We'll have some training on listening, in on-campus emergency threats, and in basic suicide prevention that I believe will be very helpful for our community of leaders and volunteers. If you are a home group leader, maybe a ministry leader in the youth ministry or the children's ministry, the open door, prime timers, or a volunteer in any of our groups, I strongly encourage you to attend these Sunday morning gatherings. Not only will you get some valuable training, but you will be able to connect with other Evergreen leaders that will help you to get a sense of the serving community here. And while these Sunday Summit gatherings are geared toward our serving community, they're open to everyone. So if you're interested in serving or you just want to learn, we invite you to come out too. Just make sure you sign up because that will help us with lunch orders for after the Summit gatherings. So once again, on Sundays in August, service will be entirely online and the Leadership Summit will be on campus, both at 10 a.m. every Sunday. Now, secondly, our Prime Timer and Joy 50 groups will be taking a special field trip to the Japanese American National Museum to sign the Ireicho book that remembers incarcerated Nikkei in World War II concentration camps. The museum is so excited to host a group from our historic church and will be including a tour along with our Ireicho stamping. If you are a Prime Timer or in the Joy 50 Plus group and would like to go, I really encourage you to do so. We have extended the registration for this trip until this Tuesday, August 1st. And so sign up if you can. If you have questions, you can contact me or Pastor Shirley, and spaces are limited, so make sure you sign up as quickly as you can. Lastly, our Tijuana missions team is preparing for their trip to Mexico on August 10th, where they will be partnering with I Am Global servants Deliris and Moise Carrion Joseph at Deborah's house and their ministry to migrants. The team is asking for donations of bath towel sets or new or gently used clothing for women and children at Deborah's house. If you can donate, we ask you to bring those items next week to our quarterly congregational meeting, which happens after service and after the Summit Leadership Gathering. There's a lot going on here at Evergreen in the next month, and even as many take our last-ditch vacations or start getting ready for the new academic year, I hope that you can join us in the month of August. Let's continue now to focus our hearts in a time of worship.
Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change, He faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best and heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, thy God doth undertake to guide the future as He has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shakes. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, the waves and winds still know His voice who ruled them while He dwelt below. In you I rest, in you I found my hope, in you I trust. You never let me go. I place my life within your hands alone. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. The hour is hastening on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still, my soul, when change and tears are past. All safe and blessed we shall meet at last. In you I rest, in you I found my hope, in you I trust. You never let me go. I place my life within your hands alone. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. God of all things, He says, be still, I know that I am God.
Now, here at Evergreen, we've been using the imagery of a home to talk about our church vision. And when you think about a home, It is the furniture inside the home that creates a sense of order and stability. Furnishings define your space. They keep your belongings out of the way. These structures give each room function and character. And as we think of our church as a home for God, our furnishings are the spiritual practices and rhythms that we observe and participate in. These are the structures of our faith that give our spiritual journey and our spiritual walk order and stability. Whether it's morning prayer or fasting for Lent, there are numerous furnishings that Christians use to populate their spiritual lives. But for our journey as a church, we wanted to consider some of the broader spiritual rhythms that we tend to emphasize here at Evergreen. Rhythms of rest, rhythms of encounter with God, rhythms of vocation and work, and last week, rhythms of gathering. Now, if you've been with us for a while, you've probably heard us talk about these before. A lot of our programming reflects these rhythms. It's why we practice, say, our days of rest, or this time tomorrow, or church in the park and park in the church, among other things. These activities that we do reflect the rhythms that we value here. And the rhythms give structure to what discipleship looks like here. Now, this wasn't an exhaustive list that we had in our sermon series. There are other practices and other rhythms that we do here and value here, but I thought this was a good sampling of some of the flavor of Evergreen. Now, this morning we wrap up our Furnishings sermon series with our final piece of furniture. And that piece of furniture is the family altar. Now, for some of us from AAPI cultures, this may harken back to memories of a Buddhist altar with burning incense sticks. For others from Latin American cultures, it may be the ofrenda that you are reminded of. And for the rest of us, maybe it reminds us of maybe a certain credenza or a fireplace mantle where our most cherished memories and pictures of deceased family and friends rest. The altar is a place of remembrance. It's a place of grief. And it's also a place of hope. I have a childhood memory of a Buddhist altar in my aunt's house. And I remember the wooden box and the headshot of my deceased uncle that sat there, and the offering that was always sitting there of mochi or some other Japanese snack that I was always tempted to take a little bite of. And I remember being fascinated that even long after we had the funeral service for my uncle, my aunt continued to remember him and offer him these Japanese snacks. Now, for our house now, we actually have kind of an unintentional version of a family altar. There's a little floating coat hanger shelf where a few of my jackets hang, and on top of that shelf sits some old black and white photographs of my maternal grandparents. Now, part of this is because it's just kind of aesthetically cool, at least for me, to have some of these old photos displayed in our house. But part of it is because we live in their old house, and I like to feel connected to them. These photos allow me to continue, in some ways, to grieve, and they allow me to feel rooted in history, in legacy, in family. They allow me to feel gratitude for what was passed to me and responsibility for what Farah and I pass on. Now, most days I don't look at these photos, but occasionally when I do, it's meaningful. And I realize that nowadays, it may not be too trendy to have something like this in our homes, to have an altar. And you may or may not have a space like this in your personal home or apartment. But as a church, I feel like this is one of the spiritual furnishings we've come to set up in our Evergreen home. Now, in Genesis chapter 12, we see Abram building altars to Yahweh God as a way of remembering a transformative encounter with God. When God promises Abram that he will give the land of Canaan to Abram's offspring, Abram builds this altar to remember that promise. Remembering is a very important spiritual practice that the Bible talks about. It reminds us of God's faithfulness in both high and low seasons of life. And when we remember the people that we've lost, our remembrance not only involves hope, but it involves grief too. And it's the mixture of embracing hope and grief that makes this a meaningful spiritual furnishing for our church home. Now, in his book, Reality, Grief, and Hope, scholar and theologian Walter Brueggemann talks about the prophetic nature of grief. That grief, in many ways, is truth-telling. In what he identifies as America's culture of denial, grief truthfully acknowledges the loss that we feel. We may feel the tendency, especially in the church, to gloss over pain because maybe we feel as Christians we're supposed to only focus on our eternal hope. But that loss and pain, even when it involves the death of loved ones, maybe we feel is not supposed to bring us down because of the Christian eternal perspective that we're supposed to have. We tend to skip over the suffering sometimes of the crucifixion to get to the glory of the resurrection. But the denial of loss and grief actually makes us less truthful to the reality that's going on in our lives. And I think it also makes us less human, something that God does not want for us. In fact, I believe grieving is something that is very Christ-like. In John chapter 11, it says, "When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.' When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. 'Where have you laid him?' he asked. 'Come and see, Lord,' they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, 'See how he loved him.' But some of them said, 'Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?'" In this well-known story of Lazarus' death, Jesus goes to the village of Bethany where Lazarus and his sisters Mary and Martha live. Lazarus has died and Mary is heartbroken. She knows that if Jesus had been there, perhaps he could have healed her brother. Now we know from the context of the story that this may have been part of Jesus' plan, to delay traveling to Bethany so that God could raise Lazarus from the grave. And on the way to the tomb, to resurrect Lazarus, Jesus enters into this moment of weeping, of grief. And you would think if anyone could have a positive attitude at this moment, it was Jesus. I mean, he was about to raise Lazarus from the grave. He knew Lazarus was going to be alive in just a matter of moments. Even so, Jesus weeps. He enters wholeheartedly into grief with Martha and Mary. Now, this tells me just how important grief is to God. So much so that Jesus chooses to grieve. He didn't have to, but he does. I believe that any of us who grieve today, Jesus chooses to grieve with us. It is God's character to weep with us. I would be even so bold to say and speculate that God always weeps with us. But here's the other amazing thing about this passage. In verse 38 and beyond, Jesus approaches the tomb and it says he is again moved deeply. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. Now, as we read this story, there's this sense as Jesus approaches the tomb that it is the grief of Jesus that motivates the resurrection power of God. It's almost as if his grief gives Jesus the resolve to approach the Father and say, "No, this is not the end for Lazarus. Lazarus, come out." Hope is born out of our grief, not apart from it. Our grief is ground zero for the hope of Christ to manifest itself. And this is actually very biblical. If we read some of the laments of the Old Testament, Sorrow and hardship continue to be all around as we read through the lament. There's no change of circumstance. Yet all of a sudden in those passages, the writers choose to have hope in the center of their grief. Like in Lamentations 3, when Jeremiah, in the midst of his bitterness and affliction, says, "Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. For his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." God's hope is born right out of grief. Now, over the past 6 years, we've had many reasons to grieve. From the loss of lifestyle in the pandemic and the cultural upheaval that was connected to that, to the loss of loved ones that we've experienced through death. One thing that I've learned over this past season is how important it is for our congregation to journey together in our grief, to make it of value, to acknowledge and remember loss in order to be truthful to our pain, but also to allow God's hope to somehow be born. We have trees on our campus to remember Nick Song and Cindy Chow. We have a youth room named after Tina Al-Young. We have a chapel named after Paul and Florence Nagano. As a community, we remember people who have passed. We even had a Christmas Sunday service where we embraced our grief and remembered the loved ones we'd lost in the pandemic. This has become a value for us, to grieve well. And the comments I've received from both Evergreeners and onlookers who have watched our services is that these moments of corporate grieving are some of our most powerful ministry moments. And I believe it's because Jesus is grieving with us. And people can sense God's presence when that happens. Even now, I know that our congregation grieves. A few weeks ago, we lost Snoopy Fong, the wife of retired senior pastor Ken Fong and mother to Janessa. Those of us who remember Snoopy know that she was a person that was never in the spotlight, but nonetheless was an influential figure in our church. She, among others, helped to set a very healthy culture for pastors' spouses here at Evergreen, which Caroline and Farah, Kenji, Saki, and Virgil continue to benefit from to this day. She was involved in iterations of women's ministry and used her professional expertise and connections to help our church financially over the years. She was both leader and friend to many of us. For me, she is a big reason that I am here and here as a senior pastor. At a time when I was graduating seminary and contemplating a move away from Evergreen, God spoke to Snoopy to tell me to stay. You see, there was a grounded wisdom about her that was so trustworthy, and so I followed her advice, and I'm always going to remember that. Now, maybe you joined Evergreen more recently and you never knew Snoopy. That's okay. We still grieve together as a church family. We mourn her and we miss her. We remember God's blessing to us through her. And in her death, we allow God's hope to be born and believe in her resurrection. Now, as we wind up this week, here's my benediction blessing for us. May we continue to be a community that grieves well. That this grieving, along with all the other topics that we've touched on in this series, becomes a spiritual rhythm of our church family. That these furnishings are a part of our spiritual home, that they help to organize and structure our journey of faith so that this community feels more and more like a home. Grace and peace to you. For our leaders and volunteers, we'll see you next week at our summit gathering on Sunday. For the rest of you, see you at our online YouTube service at 10 a.m. Have a wonderful week. Bye.